Welcome to Common Ground with Bill Walton, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
I'm here today talking with Brett Gibson and Dan Mindus. Together, they are the founders of NextGen Venture Capital. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Brett had a job as corporate development at Living Social before he founded NextGen, and he's attended Harvard Business School and University of Virginia, and he's a major in the reserves and is a U.S. Army Ranger.
That's right.
Dan, before NextGen, was at New Vantage Group, and he's been named a Washingtonians Magazine list of DC Tech Titans, which he holds a BA from Yale and also an MBA from Harvard Business School. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here, Bill.
We're here to talk about venture capital, and you two have been at it for a while. Tell me about NextGen and where we are with the venture capital industry and what you see as different about NextGen.
Yeah. Well, one asterisk on the bio, Dan has been a Tech Titan 3 times. So he has actually been named to that list 3 times.
It's good to have Brett brag for me. I try to avoid doing that myself.
Yeah. So we're grateful to be here. Thanks so much, Bill, for having us. We co-lead a venture fund called NextGen Venture Partners, which, unlike most venture funds, has thousands of part-time venture capitalists who we call venture partners who help us source deals, due diligence on early-stage companies, and support our portfolio. And we think we're the first to come at venture capital in this way, and it's led us to some very interesting opportunities.
How long has NextGen been in business?
Yeah, we've been doing this for about 3 years, and we've grown that network that Brett referred to very rapidly with some exceptional entrepreneurs and executives who are our eyes and ears on the ground. And we think the traditional model of venture capital of a handful of individuals sitting around a table making decisions about which startups to invest in can work and has worked in a number of cases, but we think there are new and exciting opportunities out there.
Well, venture capital, it's a big industry. What is the traditional model, and how big is venture capital now, and how many deals are being done, and who's doing them?
It's about a $60 billion annual industry. That is, about $60 billion are invested in startups on a yearly basis. That number has gone up from about $25 billion, maybe 5-10 years ago. The big difference is companies like Uber and Airbnb that a decade ago would have gone public, but are now waiting longer and longer to go public. And so more money as a result is flowing into venture capital. Even though those numbers sound big, I'd actually say it's pretty small compared to traditional private equity, compared to hedge funds, certainly compared to stock markets or bond markets. And it's financing innovation. It's financing the next generation of great companies.
About how many companies receive venture capital funding each year?
It's a couple thousand that receive it annually, although the bulk of that money goes to a very small number. So we might write $1 million check to a company. Others might write a $5 million check to a company. Then there's the occasional that will write $1 billion check to a company, and that's what drives the absolute numbers.
And you had asked sort of, Bill, about the origins of the industry, and I think it's interesting to look back at, the last 75 years where venture capital started in the San Francisco Bay Area, and largely as a game that Dan and I think of as a game of the few, where a handful of partners will make investment decisions. The investors have lots of leverage, and over recent years, the entrepreneurs have built more of the leverage. There's a proliferation of entrepreneurship. It's less expensive to start companies, and the investors have a little less leverage.
It used to be that if you had money, you called the shots.
That's right.
And now if you're an entrepreneur with a good idea, you call the shots.
The best entrepreneurs have options for where to take capital. The capital has become more of a commodity. And so the way that we've reimagined venture capital enables us to go to an entrepreneur and say, not only do we have capital for you, but we'll surround you with the expertise and help of hundreds of venture partners who help you build the business.
I think of venture capital as being located in Silicon Valley, maybe Boston, maybe New York. We're in the Washington, D.C. area. It gets to the question, how do you compete with the big guys in those three centers of venture capital?
Well, we're a national firm as well. We are headquartered here, and we do have the largest number of our venture partners here. but we invest in a lot of San Francisco Bay Area companies. We have some Boston companies in our portfolio as well. And the way we compete is through this network of venture partners and through having a real footprint on the ground in each of these cities. That said, there's some great investment opportunities outside of those three cities, which certainly are the leaders, along with potentially Los Angeles. We have a number of Washington, D.C. based investments. We have Austin-based investments. We have Chicago-based investments. And in those cities, you still have exceptional talent. And sometimes the prices, the valuations that we might as investors pay can be a little bit lower. Okay, one of the critiques sometimes of the industry or of New York, San Francisco in particular, is that the valuations of these companies are inflated.
Well, what is the role of the venture capitalist with the portfolio companies? I mean, don't you just, you do more than write a check, obviously, and I guess I was in that business for a little bit, so I maybe know the answer to this question, but why don't you tell me and everybody else what the value add is?
So I'd say we sort of think of it as old model and new model. Old model, venture capital implied investment in a company plus maybe a board seat that the venture capitalist would take to be helpful on a quarterly basis in some sort of a setting where the entrepreneur needed help or advice on certain ideas or challenges. I think the new model in venture, which Dan and I have tried our best to reinvent, relies on helping companies with needs that relate to access to follow-on capital, access to talent, access to new customers, and how can new venture capital funds not only provide a check and a board seat, but also come alongside, roll up their sleeves, get in the trenches with entrepreneurs and help them grow their businesses.
Well, traditional venture capital funds raise a fund from traditionally passive investors that don't get involved in the portfolio companies. It's almost purely a financial decision. You're different. You have some 950 limited partners in your fund, and they all have expertise in the industries, and many of them are CEOs and have built their own companies. Is that accurate?
So we have our own fund. We have our own pool of dedicated capital that we can invest in these companies. And then we also have this network of people who are active, right? People who are finding the companies to begin with, who are saying, hey, this person was the CTO of my last company. It's the smartest person.
Chief Technology Officer.
Chief Technology Officer, yes. Smartest person I've ever met. They're starting a new company. I've been tracking their progress. NextGen has to take a look, and we potentially want to fund this company. So having this army of people who are finding those companies, but also I think perhaps most importantly, to your question about what do you do after you invest? To Brett's question, this is an army of people who are available to help, who want to support innovation, who want to support the next generation of companies. And we imagine it to some degree as having a service mentality towards entrepreneurs. It's really hard to be an entrepreneur. The deck is stacked against you, but
you're isolated.
Very isolated, very isolated. You need, be a leadership in any role is isolating, but in particular in the fast-moving environment of an early-stage technology entrepreneur.
Well, you're getting at something. We had a toehold at Allied Capital and Venture Capital, and we were in Washington D.C. And the thing that always struck me is a deal would come in and it would describe some solution to some big problem, and it sounded great, but yet I didn't know who else in the country was also working on the same problem, or maybe not who else, how many other dozens of people were working on the same problem. And it seems like your distributed network allows you to get out into the industry to see if anybody else has come up with a better solution than what you're looking at.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think there's one model of venture capital where you would go incredibly deep in a particular industry. You become the world's leading expert in internet applications for agriculture, and so you might know. But if you're
How big a market is that?
That's exactly the challenge with going deep is maybe there are only 3 or 4 companies to invest in, versus having a broader view. But then what you need is expertise from other people and other sources, and that's where this network of venture partners that we've put together is so valuable because they know. And in fact, often our venture partners are the buyers of technology. And we'll say, oh yeah, I've looked at that company, and then I've looked at 4 of their competitors, and let me tell you about the pros and cons. And that information is invaluable to us as investors, but it also, we believe, helps accelerate innovation, because what you want as an overall economy is to put money behind the best companies, to put more resources behind the entrepreneurs with the best solutions, with the best technology, with the most determination to make it work. That's our job, to pick these companies, but ultimately, we all want the next, great company to come along that employs thousands of people, that drives innovation, that helps, pay down our national debt, and so I think we think it's good for everybody.
Well, I think of the most successful venture capital firms. I don't think anybody in these firms have IQs under 150. I mean, they're very stacked with talent, very stacked with deep subject matter expertise. How do you compete with something like a Sequoia or NEA or some of these other ones that already have this talent embedded? And you're an upstart, and I'm sure you got a good answer.
Yeah. We've been fortunate so far in our first 20 investments to invest alongside of several of those top funds. And what we're learning is they have noticed that our model is different and see us as a different type of investor to add to the cap table alongside of their investment. So they might invest with their capital plus their board seat, but they don't have this army of part-time help that we bring along with our capital. And so they've seen, I think, and their heads have turned to our new model and said, I'd love to connect my portfolio CEO to a network of nearly 1,000 functional experts with industry expertise, with been there experience that's relevant over the last several years. And to them as Sequoia, Benchmark, Greylock, Founders Fund, to them as a top tier fund, they see that as a value added partner in building these early stage companies.
Well, we hear a lot of gloom about the economy, less so now, but I think we're still looking for more growth. Yet where you are, you're looking at a lot of interesting new industries, a lot of exciting entrepreneurs. It's a very positive experience, I would bet. What industries do you like? Where do you want to spend your time? What should we be following?
Well, there are a lot of industries that are really exciting. I'll mention two. First is transportation. So we think there's a revolution going on from, first you see these new fleets of cars like Uber and Lyft, but autonomous vehicles are coming, I think, faster than most people expect. You're seeing supersonic planes. You're seeing hyperloops that are high-speed trains going up to 700 miles an hour. You're seeing drones that can carry packages from point A to point B, better, faster, cheaper. So I think there's a revolution going on in transportation.
Now, are these being backed by venture capital, or are they being backed by corporate venture capital? I mean, is it both, or?
Yeah, in many cases, they're being backed by traditional venture capital. So,
Okay.
for example, we invested in a company called Virgin Hyperloop One, renamed Virgin after Richard Branson invested in and joined the board. And that's tradition. Up until that investment, it's been traditional venture capital firms like ours that have supported the growth of that company. And I think that.
And what's it do?
So they're commercializing Elon Musk's concept of a fifth mode of transportation, which is effectively, it looks like it's a high-speed train.
Okay, first, what are the first four modes of transportation?
Right.
Land, air, sea,
Yeah.
If by land, but
Water.
this is Paul Revere, right? Or we?
Yeah, exactly. First if by land. I think car, train, plane, and boat.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so,
So what- and
the
this-
idea is this is number 5.
Okay, and number 5 is
Hyperloop.
Yeah, imagine
What's a Hyperloop?
A vacuum tube, sort of like a pneumatic tube.
Yeah.
And you push a pod through it, and because there's no friction in a vacuum tube, you can get it up at incredibly high speeds.
Oh, well, that sounds interesting.
They're going to transport cargo before they start transporting humans to just sort of test on a lower risk passenger class.
I was hoping the fifth mode might be the Star Trek mode, where we could just beam ourselves up or over.
Coming soon.
Yeah.
Coming soon.
Are you working on that?
We're trying. We're trying.
So one of the issues that you have to deal with in this industry is there's 90 billion, 100 billion sitting out there ready to be invested. So there's a lot of competition. I don't think people quite appreciate how hard it is to get into deals. And I think you've gotten in through your distributed network. Is there any other value add? I mean, you've got a portfolio support team. What do you do with your companies once they're in the portfolio?
We curate introductions to the most important stakeholders for that business. So we'll actually go to the CEO of a portfolio company and say, what can we do to help? And typically they'll say one of 3 things. I need help with follow-on capital. So help me find a follow-on investor to raise more capital later. Help me find customers, or help me find talent. And we've built essentially this network with expertise on demand in those 3 key areas. Actually, we track this very closely. Over the last quarter, we've made what we call 96 impact connections for our portfolio company. So 20 different CEOs have asked us over 130 times for help. And of those 130 times, 96 we're actually converting on a successful connection that promotes their business. That's really unheard of in this industry, to be that service-minded, as Dan said.
How big is your regular staff? You've got your investors. How big a firm is it?
There are 8 of us full time.
8 full-time? So you've really done a lot with you've leveraged a lot of resources with your platform. How does your platform work?
Yeah, so we've built effectively an internal Facebook that also facilitates these investments. And so our venture partners can connect with one another, can access resources, articles, webinars, podcasts, can learn about the investments that we're making, can communicate about them, can share ideas about investment opportunities. And it's something we've built in-house, but it allows a team of 8 to be much more effective and do what we think would otherwise be a team of 16.
So what issue, I mean, we talked a little bit before going on the air that you've had a lot of success investing in regulated industries. Since we're here in Washington and we talk a lot about regulations, what's that involve?
So, we look at investing in regulated industries as an enormous opportunity because you can go in and back a disruptor who's going after typically a large, highly regulated industry, and they're coming at it in a more efficient way. So a couple of the areas, and Dan spoke about transportation. Another area where we've attacked is healthcare. We have a portfolio company that allows patients in the comfort of their living room to test themselves for high blood pressure, for high cholesterol, food allergies, enormously disruptive to a large lab industry that's owned by 2 large players, multi-billion-dollar industry, and this founder happens to be going after this enormous industry with a very disruptive approach. A telehealth company that we've recently invested in is our most mature company that's making it better, faster, cheaper to get healthcare on any device at any place in the world at any time. Have a doctor basically can be in the palm of your hand using telehealth. Fascinating industry, disrupting the large, 17% of our economy industry of healthcare.
So how does telehealth work? You've got a device, and
Yeah. Well, so one application, just you mentioned the military background. So when we were deployed overseas, you couldn't get the best treatment for traumatic brain injuries, let's say, because the best treatment was at the Mayo Clinic. Well, in our embassies and in our forward operating bases that the military used around the world, they use telehealth to enable doctors from the Mayo Clinic to treat soldiers, airmen, Marines using an iPad. And this is the technology of the future that we get to invest in.
So with this, how does it disrupt the entrenched company? I mean, you've got a big company. How do they get away with not obeying the same regulations the entrenched company does? Or what am I missing?
Yeah.
Well, I think in the case of telehealth, what you're allowing for is just a better use of resources, where the top neurosurgeon or stroke doctor in the world can see patient after patient after patient wherever they happen to be around the world. And that's better for patients. It allows for training because people can watch the doctor, get the recording and watch the doctor in action. So the innovation that we're privileged enough as venture capitalists to back, we think improves human health. It makes our economy run better. It gives sort of energy to young talent all over the world. So there are a whole host of ways in which it's all very exciting to us.
So does this make being a top doc make it almost like a superstar business, where you've got just a handful of people who are the best in the world, and you can really have them serve thousands, millions more people, and maybe millions is a bit of exaggeration, but is that the right way to think about this?
It does have that potential. So, for example, if the best Mayo Clinic doctors in the world, or Cleveland Clinic doctors, or Memorial Sloan Kettering doctors can see more patients, can line them up back to back, can see the patients that have the highest need, where their unique talents are most appropriate, then yes, that could lead to more revenue for the doctor or the hospital. And all the companies that we invest in have to have a business model. They have to make money, and so that's one of the ways they can make money through telehealth.
Well, we say all the companies you invest in have to make money, but we know they do not. So what's the typical success rate in the industry, and what are you shooting for with your portfolio?
So, I'd say we've talked about this a little bit before we went on the air, but this business is a business of the power law, meaning there's a handful of outcomes that produce a disproportionate amount of the success. So you have, in every single year, you have a company that stands out, whether it's an Airbnb or an Uber, what's next, Dropbox, these companies that really define a particular vintage year of venture investing. We just happen to think we found a way to find those winners sooner and allow our investors to get access to them because we use the collective intelligence of this network. But I think to your question, it's tough to say what the target is. I think we target high 20% IRR for our investors
on average.
Yeah, which would be a nice healthy return.
Which might mean 1 or 2 companies out of 10
Yeah.
are fantastic and everything else is mediocre or down the tubes.
That's right.
But that's the business. I mean, that's been the business for 60, 70, 80 years.
Yep.
I think I'm rusty on some of these math, but I think at one point some of the top 10 venture capital-backed companies represented well over 100% of all the returns in the industry.
Yeah.
Is that
It's a
still
game of
pretty much-
outliers. It really is. It's a game where 1 or 2 companies will drive the returns of an entire portfolio.
So I have to ask the question, are there any outliers in your portfolio that I can
We love
talk
all of
with?
our children equally.
Okay, well, at this point, you have to say that. One of the things we talked about before coming on the air, I'm struck by where venture capital is done. It's the most successful states hosting venture capital, either venture capital firms or companies, are California, New York, and Massachusetts, and I don't think of those as necessarily business-friendly states. Is they just an exception there, or what? Is there anything going on that would be interesting to know about?
The way we think about it, it's actually where's the concentration of technical talent.
Okay.
And so I think that Boston and the San Francisco Bay Area have historically been the top 2 cities for entrepreneurship and for venture capital, at least since World War II. And that's really because the best technical minds in the world were brought there in large part actually for the war effort, right? So it was MIT and Stanford in particular, where you brought scientists, the engineers, the mathematicians, and out of that talent came the semiconductor industry.
Yeah.
That's why Silicon Valley is called Silicon Valley. Semiconductors made out of silicon. What at the time was called the mini computer industry, which originated in Boston, which led to the PC and the laptop and so forth.
Yeah.
But it came out of really these universities and all the money that poured in to develop weaponry and beating the Nazis. So it's less about state level policy and more about city level talent. And I think now you have more and more cities that are centers of venture capital, and that includes Austin, that includes Washington, D.C., that includes Los Angeles increasingly. And the driver is often where is the talent, and especially the technical talent, where do they want to live? And are there companies that have brought in large amounts of talent, like an Amazon or a Microsoft have in Seattle, that can, once you get the training and you get to meet other talented people, you go off and you start your own company.
What do we call those? Clusters?
Mm-hmm.
And didn't Michael Porter have a lot to say about that was one of the source of advantages where you can get a critical mass of people, whether it's in your business or Hollywood?
Yeah.
And one of my favorite examples is the Northern Italian metalworking business. It turns out at one point all of the metalworkers, all the best metalworkers in the world lived near Milan. And so that became the Silicon Valley of the, 19th century.
Yeah. You're seeing that crop up in the U.S. today, and I think Dan and I have the fortune to travel around the country and see some of these different hubs. And recently we were in Detroit. And what you're seeing in Detroit is a resurgence of technology that was born out of the auto industry, but today is being transferred to automated navigation, autonomy, as Dan said, driverless cars. Dan Gilbert, the founder of Quicken Loans, is really underwriting a lot of that growth in Detroit. And you're seeing that in other cities as well.
So if you're mayor or governor of a state and you're trying to drive economic growth, what are the elements you put in place? You got to have research university, hospital to build something around?
I should say it's very difficult. I think
that's my impression.
I think Michael Bloomberg did something really important for New York City in bringing basically a new university to Roosevelt Island. And that was a collaboration between Cornell and Technion, basically the MIT of Israel. So research universities are key. I think probably the single most important thing that government has done anywhere in the world to foster venture capital and to foster entrepreneurship is in Israel. They had 20 years ago, it was 2 things. One was when the French cut Israel off from arming them after the 6-Day War. Israel said, we have to create our own military-industrial complex. And so a ton of technical talent went into that, and then has over time commercialized technology. But the second thing they did was the state, in a very serious way, subsidized venture capital. Right? I think they invested $2 of taxpayer dollars for every $1 of private money. And Israel is now the second leading technology country in the world, and has probably second to Silicon Valley, I think, globally is Tel Aviv. Otherwise, it's really difficult to manufacture this. It really has to do with, did Jeff Bezos, Jeff Bezos decided to move to Seattle partially because of tax rates in the state of Washington. And now, as a result, you have this incredible burgeoning entrepreneurial ecosystem and technology ecosystem in Seattle. But did the legislatures in Washington State know what they were getting? Maybe, maybe not.
Mm-hmm. And coming back to your model, though, you were able to operate inside all these clusters because of the distributed investors and support system. Mm-hmm. What other companies should we talk about in your portfolio? I know all your children are your favorites.
Yeah. There's one company that we really like that we're following closely that's out in the Bay Area that focuses on the 1099 workforce. So they focus on the gig economy, meaning people who work part-time for companies like Uber, Airbnb, Lyft. Essentially what they're doing is enabling that workforce to get paid faster. When you work for one of these part-time companies, you may or may not get paid for 30 or 60 days, and that may not be perfect for you if you're supporting a family at home and things like that. So this company, Quill, has enabled the workers to get paid faster, and they pay a percentage on the transaction. But what Quill's doing is they're underwriting the creditworthiness of the company, like the Uber, like the drone base, like the Airbnb, rather than the individuals. They're taking a risk on the company, not the individual, which is enabling them to underwrite these.
What are the rates they charge?
It's low. It's favorable to the employee. It's a competitive rate for them.
So this isn't a payday lending.
It's not predatory.
Stay away from that. Highly recommend. That's very valuable advice, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure you didn't know that.
Yeah.
What else do we like in the portfolio?
Well, we were talking about Washington, D.C., and we were talking
Yeah.
about regulated industries. So another example is Vemma Education, which allows universities to get paid with a % of future student earnings. So in addition to debt, in addition to grants, in addition to tuition, universities now have this new way of getting paid. And what it does is it aligns the incentives between the university and the student. The university says, hey, we're going to take a bet on you. We believe in our education. We believe that you can go out and earn a good living. And so this way, if you don't earn a good living, we won't get paid as much. And if you do, and you're successful, at least financially, then we'll get paid a little bit more.
So how does that work? If you make $100,000, you pay what percentage? If you make $200,000, how does it work?
Well, you're paying the same percentage regardless of how much you make. And so that it's progressive in that way. Whereas debt, if you make $20,000 a year or $100,000 a year, you have the same obligation. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Vemma Education, if you make $20,000 a year, maybe you're going to pay 5% of that. And if you make $100,000 a year, you're going to pay 5% of that. So what it means, the universities that do best by their students, at least with regard to financial outcomes, are better positioned to say, we believe in you. We'll just take 5%.
So the bet is
earnings.
I'm going to we'll take a lower tuition from you in return for a piece of your future income.
Exactly right. And in some cases, no tuition at all.
Interesting. And is there a cap on that, or is it?
Yes. So typically you're capped out at maybe a couple times the amount that you effectively borrowed. You're not, if you earn $1 million a year, right, they're not going to take 5% of that, right? It comes down over time.
Oh, that's very interesting. So what else do we have in the portfolio that?
There's a company that we're really excited about in the Bay Area that was sourced by one of our venture partners. He happened to know the founders before they started this company when they sold their last company to Facebook. The company's called Limbic Health, and what they're doing is they're applying virtual reality technology as a solution for behavioral health challenges. So that, let's say you suffer from a fear of public speaking, which I would assume as a person that leads a video, an online video production, you wouldn't. But if you had a fear of public speaking.
You mean this is going to be in the public? I thought we were just talking in the speakeasy. Oh my God. I I was misinformed.
That's right. So,
Anyway,
the
continue.
virtual
Yeah.
reality enables you to essentially go into an immersive environment, into a scenario where you might be fearful of, let's say a conference room, and essentially unwire your fear of public speaking by being in a virtual environment using virtual reality. And they apply
fascinating.
this same behavioral health solution to people that have addictions, post-traumatic stress, different scenarios where it's helpful to be in an environment that would help you unwire fear. And the two founders started their last company. They sold it to Facebook, and our venture partner knew they were starting this company, and we got to get in at the very early stage alongside Sequoia.
What's the valuation for something like that?
At this stage, it's low, but we thought high.
Okay.
They're a Bay Area company with two founders that sold their last company to Facebook, so there is an enormous amount of value in them. And
Right.
without
Right.
any traction, we were just grateful to be along for their journey.
Right. One thing I forgot to touch on, we've got different stages of venture capital. There's seed, there's early, there's, late, there's expansion growth capital. Where do you operate in the cycle?
We're at the seed stage.
At the seed?
So that is quite early.
Yeah.
And quite risky. So as you noted, many of these companies don't make it. But when they do, the financial returns can be extraordinary. And that early stage is where that spark of innovation and that creativity is at its highest, where the trajectory of the company is often matters the most. So it's an exciting place to be, and an opportunity when the companies do well to also do well with them.
How many of your companies are pre-revenue?
When we invest,
I'm sorry, technical term means they're not.
yeah,
They
they have not earned a dollar. No one has paid them for anything.
You mean they're supposed to make money?
Yeah. At the time of the initial investment, about a quarter of the companies we invest in are pre-revenue.
Okay.
So haven't brought in a dollar.
So
from any
how do
customer.
I come from the world of investing in cash flow, private equity, lending, that sort of thing. How do you decide whether a company deserves a shot?
There are a lot of factors, but the most important is team. You want to bet on the individual or the group of individuals who you think can be successful, whatever the circumstances, who have the determination, the industry expertise, the intelligence, the often charisma to bring a team together, to sell partners and subsequent rounds of financiers on the vision. And at an early stage, if the founders leave, if the founders quit, if the founders get hit by a bus, the company dies. At a later stage, at a more mature stage of company, if you have $100 million in revenue and $20 million of profit, if the CEO gets hit by a bus, you'll find another CEO, right? At the early stage, that's not the case.
So how much personality evaluation do you do? How much digging, how much research and, checking background of people and what they've done? And I have a better idea. Have you guys thought about a software package that evaluates CEOs and venture capital teams?
I think we could sort of do one better, which is that we can typically get firsthand experience on the founder from our venture partners. And there isn't a software silver bullet that we've found yet, but the best thing we found is finding somebody who's worked with that founder before and can give you an account from firsthand experience of what it was like to work with them, what the integrity level is, what the work ethic is, what the competency is. And that's what's so beautiful about our network-driven model, is that nearly every one of our companies, the founder has worked with one of our venture partners. So we can get firsthand knowledge. It's sort of an arbitrage on private information about that portfolio founder.
Well, it sounds like you guys are going to have a lot of success. And venture capital sounds like a lot of fun most of the time, but I know it isn't all the time. What's the hardest part of your job?
I think, geez, Dan.
Answering that question. Is that
We've developed these nonverbal cues, and I thought Dan picked up that I was hoping he would answer that one.
you guys
No, I picked it up. I just didn't have a good answer.
You guys have been distributing these answers very well.
Yeah.
We try. We try. We're both trying to avoid that part.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think the question, from
See how I got Brett to
Yeah,
to
yeah.
answer
Well
that
done.
one?
it's slow money in and slow money out. So when you think about
forever,
the
yeah.
asset class, it takes patience, and I'd say that's the hardest part,
It can take 5 to 10 years.
easily, if not more.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest success stories in venture are still private companies where investors invested over a decade ago, and the founders and the team.
I'm in a couple of those
Yeah.
deals.
So you're watching the clock.
They keep
Yeah.
telling me it's going to be great
Test
someday.
your patience.
Yeah. And you're so excited about these companies, and you know there will be financial success, but you go home to your spouse and they may say something like, you can't spend paper equity at the grocery store. So let's get these things moving. But there's patience involved. This is an asset class that requires patience.
Exactly. Dan, final word?
This has been great and fun, and most of the time when we have conversations like this, there's a lot less laughter. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I'm glad you guys are here. I hope to have you back when we get our first liquidity event, which will be great. You can find our team at nextgenvp.com, and it's a very robust website with a lot of information about the people and the investments. And I'm looking forward to following you guys and your success.
It's great talking to you, Bill.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Great.
Bill.
Thanks for listening. Want more? Be sure to subscribe to Common Ground with Bill Walton on iTunes.